I graduated in biology here in Portugal, and then, just straight biology. Wanted to study primates. Well, actually, I started wanting to do marine biology. Then my path derived to my path derived to primates, and soon, as I began doing biology, I started looking into primates, and then from there, I never went back. And so initially, I was really into behavior. I was looking at facial expressions, and I was doing all this work that required a lot of hours looking at primates, and this I thought it was what I liked. And when it came the time to do to move on, I my girlfriend, wife now, one was going to London, so I said I'll go with you and let's see what happens. And so I got into a PhD at UCL in the anthropology department. So me coming from biology, going to anthropology department, and I mean, biology, at least when I was studying, was really, data driven and very into, very scientific. And I went to the anthropology department, to the biological anthropology department, where we were about 5 or 6, but there were 30 social anthropologists. So, and during the seminars that we had, weekly seminars, I start actually broadening my mind into what we do as biologists, what they do as anthropologists, and how these two fields can actually come together, and they bring information to help us both in what we do. And so I did my PhD there. I went to Nigeria, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that as well, studying chimpanzees and baboons and other mammals, because also it was very hard to do the field work there. And then when I was finishing the degree, my PhD, I said, well, maybe academia is not really for me. Let me try to get some money. And so when I came back to Portugal, well, let me dive into the real world, and I opened an art gallery, which has nothing to do with biology or with academia. But because my wife, she's into art since we were together in the beginning, so we did actually do some projects together that had to do with biology and art and putting things together. We took artists to Nigeria. We had projects coming out from that. We raised money for conservation from that. So, I was always involved in art. So I had a hiatus in academia for about 6 or 7 years. And the gallery was here in Portugal when I came back. And then I decided, well, maybe what I really liked was when I had time to think about stuff and, have the freedom to think about doing this sort of projects that are interesting and that I really like. Maybe I won't get rich, but I moved back into academia, and now I'm teaching at Lusofona, and started, from this happened 3-4 years ago. So, starting new project and trying to really get back on track and into primatology again. And as I told you, I was into behavior, I was into ecology. I was never much into conservation. Conservation was never like, I want to be a conservationist. But when you go to the field, you have to do conservation. I mean, it's very depressing because almost always fails, but you really have to do it, and it's part of what you do, and it's what I'm going to talk to you about today as well. So wildlife and communities, partners in conservation, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what Ivo as well talked about. So how we can involve communities and how we can involve people into our conservation strategies, and which will be extremely important if we want to actually do research there, because without these people, without these strategies, we will never be able to do anything actually. So we get bombarded every day with biodiversity loss. the sixth mass extinction is always on the headlines. This is from 2 weeks ago, I guess. But what does it mean? What does it mean that we are facing the mass extinction? Because these are big words, and I guess and general population really don't really. I mean, they understand it, but it's always get put to the side. It doesn't really matter when other things are going on. There's books about it. I haven't read it, but I really want to read it. What does it mean? Well, according to the IPBES, 1 million species are at risk of extinction in the coming decades. And this is driven largely by human activity. We all know that. And this doesn't happen only in here in Europe and in what we call the more developed world. It happens most especially in these biodiversity hotspots where extractivist industries are destroying and are taking out all they can with no regard for what's going to happen in the future. So the solution, we have the solution, which is biodiversity conservation. And I asked ChatGPT to get me an image of a more holistic view of biodiversity conservation. And this is what I got from it, which is not my view on conservation at all. It doesn't reflect my view on conservation at all. And I like this, when you look at, there's the horn, and then they are here as well, so. Yeah, the crystals are very important. But how do we do that? How can we do that? It's very difficult, and when you go out to the field and you really understand that each case is a case and it changes rapidly also. What you think is good now, it will be bad in a few months later. So historically, conservation strategies that relied solely on protected areas from or top-down enforcement have proven insufficient. So this is what was done most of the times, before the 90s, where you would just, okay, this is a protected area, we take everyone from there, we enforce security here, and we keep the animals in. And this is failing, especially in biodiverse populated landscapes, because people also live there, so they are also part of the ecosystem. So the model of fortress conservation, excluding local people to protect nature, led to displacement. So people were removed from the places where they lived. They were forced to move. They lost access to their ancestral lands, to their ancestral practices. Erosion of traditional stewardship systems. So these systems were in place for several years, and people knew how to navigate through the systems. And so once you come and you put these new rules, it all breaks down. So, and you get into a chaotic system where everyone can do whatever they want. And then long-term conflict and resentment undermining conservation goals. So people really don't like it when you tell them to, okay, now you cannot live here and you have to go somewhere else. And so from the early 90s onwards, there was a shift towards community-based conservation involving local peoples as partners in conservation. So recognizing that people have customary rights to land. So they've been there for a long time. They're part of almost a part of the ecology of the place. And they have right to land and to the resources as well, and they depend on those. They provide benefits. These conservation strategies should provide benefits for these people, like jobs, tourism revenues, cultural pride. So, really involve people, and so that they can, even if they cannot use all the resources they used to use before, then they can shift towards some revenue or some other type of resources. And support local governance institutions that can manage natural resources sustainability. So really empower local governance institutions, which is complicated because whenever there's power, there's problems, but work more locally instead of coming from top-down approaches, being the main government deciding what's happening in different areas. So conservation-based, community-based conservation initiatives very widely informed and outcome, often reflecting power dynamics and the level of community agency. And this varies a lot because you can have community-based conservation strategies that are really linked to the local people, or then you can have them linked to local governments or to powerful institutions that work locally. So each case is a case, so that this is a name that embarks a lot of different strategies, a lot of different cases. So there is no one-size-fits-all model. Context really matters. And what I'm going to show you is a little bit of my experience during my PhD and my experience now trying to do some work on conservation, or trying to navigate the conservation network in Africa, actually, in 2 places in Africa. So this will be in Nigeria, in Gashaka-Gumti National Park, where I did my PhD, which is an example of one of these initial ideas of doing community-based conservation. So setting up a park, a national park, where people really could say what they need, how they want it to be made, and was an initial try to do a big thing like that. And we'll see how that worked out. So Gashaka-Gumti National Park is the largest national park in Nigeria. It's right here in the border with Cameroon. It's in two different states in Nigeria. So from there, you already have 2 state governments working where the park belongs to, and they still have the Nigerian Cameroonian chimpanzee there, which is the flagship species for the park. And I was looking into chimpanzees and also into baboons in the national park. The park has the diverse ecosystems. This northern part of the park is more dry. It's more made of grassland, whereas the lower part of the park, the Gashaka area, is more forested, with gallery forests, with riverine forests and mountain forests. And this is where I was working. This is where the chimpanzees actually are, and most animals are there as well. The park, this is what some of the areas of the park look like. So the park was built with enclaves in it, so that people wouldn't have to move outside of the park. They were created enclaves where people were still allowed to live in the park. So just a little bit of the history of the park. Pre-1960s, the area was a wilderness-rich wildlife with cultural hunting traditions. This was mostly used by Fulani cattle herders and some indigenous hunters, which were living in the landscape and were deeply depending on the landscape. Following Nigeria's independence, there was a growing interest in resources on the park, and so also in the protection of these resources. And then in the 70s, there was the creation of this sanctuaries, the Serti, Gashaka, and Gumti. So these are 3 areas that now belong to the park, that were created to establish some sort of protection to these areas. Okay, and this was made together with the traditional rulers. So these areas were defined together with the traditional rulers that belonged to this Fulani, mostly to this Fulani ethnicity. Then in the 80s, there was sort of a collapse. So there was little money coming in to help support these initiatives. And so poaching went up, deforestation, and then there was the rinderpest outbreaks, which killed a lot of the livestock. So people that depend mostly on cow herding had big losses. Most of the cows died, and also within the park, a lot of ungulates, especially the buffaloes, all died as well. And then in the 90s, there was a revival, new infrastructure, ranger training, and scientific research programs were launched. And the park was officially built in 1991. And then from there, the research and community program started. And the Gachaca Primate Project, where I worked at, was launched in 1999, if I'm not mistaken. So this is the national park, and these here are the enclaves where people are still living, where they are still keeping their cows, they're keeping their herds. They're usually on the highlands, and this is what it sort of looks like when you're up there in the highlands. So there's no vegetation anymore. It's all been taken down for pasture. And so Gachaca is one of the places where we worked. So this village was kept out of the park, and it's still out of the park. This is where we had one field station, and then here we had another field station in Quano. This is a quote from the guidebook, the Gachaca Gumti National Park guidebook by Andrew Dunn, which was a big influence in making the park, and he followed from others like Richard Barnwell as well. And what it says that it really shows what they were trying to do. It was decided that the essential needs of the resident pastoral people and the demands of wildlife conservation could be both accommodated within some protected area. At Gachaca Gumti, enclaves are managed jointly by the National Park Service and local people in such ways as to safeguard long-term conservation interests and livelihoods. Gachaca Gumti National Park represents a pioneering experiment in multi-purpose land use in Nigeria. So this was the main idea of building this park. And local leaders really do have a say. So we always had to meet with the Jauros, with the Lamidos, and they meet. And so even the conservator general of the park really needs to talk to these local leaders, because without them, you really cannot do much. Okay, if they say that the cows can go inside the park, the cows will go inside the park. No matter how many rangers you put there, the cows will still go inside the park, because for the local people, they're higher authority than the park authority. So this is more what conservation looks like in my mind, not those crystals and not the rainbows. It's really having to manage people, having to manage people's needs, and having to deal with all this situation. So these are the main problems in Gachaca Gumti National Park. So it's the cultural traditions, it's the herding of the cows that go inside the park, it's the bushmeat hunting, and it's the burning of the forest so that new pastures are created all the time. And then we have also some problems with animals who are crop raiding, and so there are always conflicts as well between human populations and wildlife within the park. Just a quick note, so the park had a huge biodiversity until the 1950s. There were still elephants. They were gone after that. Then the last lions were seen in the 90s, and most carnivores all disappeared. So they were all killed by local herdsmen. So they would just poison carcasses and let the animals come and eat them, and so they all disappeared. So there used to be hyenas, wild dogs, lions, Leopards, last year was the first time that they got leopards on camera. We knew that they were there. We could see the marks, but the first time that they got leopards on camera was last year. And then these guys are also seen as really bad because they destroy all the crops. Okay, so these pastoralists had, even though they were allowed to stay in the park, they had to change the way that they live because they are usually nomadic, and so now they would have to be fixed to these places inside the park. They still take their cows around, but they are now based in these specific areas within the park, so they also turn into producing some crops. Since they are settled, then also they start agriculture, some agriculture, and then they start having problems with baboons and other crop raiders. This is a study site, so we were looking at two baboon troops, the one in the Quano station and the one in the Gam station. The one in the Quano station, they are mostly wild feeding baboons, so they feed on what's available naturally, whereas the Gam baboons, they cooperate on these fields that are near the village of Gachaca. Okay, so the idea was to compare always these two troops, see how they adapt, what are the differences. And we have data for these troops since 2002 until 2016. So we would follow them. We knew them individually. We know exactly all these black lines are the mothers. So how many daughters they had, when they died, when they become mature, when they left the group, all the males that came into the group. So we have all this data, which is very valuable. And this was important for us, to keep track of these baboons for the whole time. And we did this in both places. And when we look at the group size development, we can see that the wild feeding more or less kept the same size, whereas the crop raiding really had a big decline here. Okay, and now it's gone down. It's completely gone. What happened here? So this decline here coincides with the last two PhD students, which were actually looking at these baboons. And so once they left, the baboon population started going down. And we knew that this was going to happen because every time students would go there, there would rocks thrown at them because everyone thought that the students were bringing the baboons to feed on the crops. But people in the village were getting paid to work with the baboons. There was people coming to study the baboons, so the baboons sort of had to stay there once the researchers left, so the baboons were gone. And they sort of, I looked at this several times because it's very weird that they keep the same numbers, but one dies, one is born, one dies, one is born, and it kept constant for a long time. And then the Gachaca Parent project disappeared, so the baboons also disappeared completely. So what failed? It's very hard to understand what failed. So this was a park. This is a park that was built with all the right ideas, but there's always conflict. There's always problems. There's always things that don't work. For us, now in retrospective, when I was there, I wasn't thinking about this stuff, but of course that the baboons were going to get killed once we left if we had no measures to keep them there. And this is just an example of what happens to the rest of the wildlife, because conservation in this area was always linked to research. And as soon as research left, it all collapsed. So what failed was actually maybe listening more to people's needs. What do they need? How can we help them be happy and maintain this sort of dynamics going on? So when we went to look at, or there was a PhD student looking at exactly at this, and what people actually wanted had nothing to do with the wildlife or with having, they wanted access to the park for the cows, but they wanted clinics, they wanted education, they wanted all these things that this project didn't really get into play. And moving beyond people as threat, so traditional conservation often frames local people as problems to be managed, poachers, encroachers, or resource users to be restricted. So, and this is one of the major problems. Even though the park was created with the idea that cow herds could stay within the park and they could use some of the park, they were always seen as a threat. And huge conflicts erupted over time. Fulani cows herds were killed, park rangers were killed, and they are still being killed. So now the park rangers are actually military enforced. So this is it sort of escalated also because as soon as you start arming the guards, the rangers, and then the Fulani people get mad because they have less and less access. So it's very complicated. And in terms of what happened to the baboons, well, actually, the baboons were killed because they are seen as pests. But when we looked at it, the fear of baboons was actually outweighed by the measures of crop rate. So baboons weren't really destroying that much crops, but the perception that the baboons were really taking all the crops was enough for them to all to be killed. So what failed here was also educating people, educating these communities on the importance of baboons being there, the importance of wildlife, living with wildlife, and how this can be managed. Okay. So this was what I did in Gashaka. And then I had a hiatus. I went in an art gallery, and now I came back, and I was enticed by a colleague to go to São Tomé and Príncipe to look at the mono monkeys there. So monkeys in São Tomé and Príncipe, there are guanans. You've already talked a lot about guanans. These are mono monkeys. They were introduced by the Portuguese in about 1470. They were introduced together with different species. So there were monkeys, African civets, pigs, cats, rats, dogs, and people. They were all introduced by the Portuguese. So this is a completely different setting from what I showed you before. The mono monkeys here are seen as invasive species. So they are considered invasive species. They are endemic to Western Africa. They live the mono monkeys live from Ghana to Cameroon. They were actually in Nigeria in Gashaka-Gumti National Park. I saw them almost every day. I never cared about them, and now I am actually working with them. But they were always a pain because they would always alarm call, and the chimpanzees knew we were there, so they would run away. We could never see the baboons because of the mono monkeys. So I didn't like them. And they are invasive in the islands of São Tomé and Príncipe and in the island of Grenada. They are in the global invasive species database, and they are living there since for about 400 years, maybe. And the islands of São Tomé and Príncipe, I work mostly in Príncipe for now. My idea is to also do some work in São Tomé, and I'm interested mostly in how these monkeys adapted to this island, so how flexible they are, what are they doing that might be different from the continent. So that's my idea. It's never had to do with conservation. But when going there, I obviously was in touch with all these conservation programs, the Tordo, the Príncipe thrush, and the giant snail, Diobo Buzidobo, and it coincided with this sort of news came out that monkeys were really the villains, and they were the biggest threat to the Principes thrush. So this was in 2021, which was the first time I went there, and then this news came out, and this came from a study that was actually done by a researcher here in CBO. So it was short communication showing that monomonkeys predate on the thrush's eggs, which, I mean, you would expect that. But it was just a short communication, and we always care about impact factor. And this short communication had a huge impact. So it was all over the news outlets, and even in the field, it had huge impact. So these monkeys, they live in a humanized landscape. They are eaten always, as soon as whenever people can get their hands on them, they will actually hunt them and eat them. And what I feel what was my feeling when I got there? That distribution of threat to monkeys may be disproportionate, especially given the other risks. So we are vilifying these monkeys, and the first year I went there, I mean, there was this idea that the monkeys were eating because these studies were just coming out and people were talking about it. But last year, this was the guides, every guide that would take people to the park would say that, I mean, these monkeys, they are killing all the endemic species, you know, they are responsible. So the monkeys now are really the big villains. So, and I was interested in monkeys, and I was asking people about the monkeys, and people started getting a bit reluctant to talk to me about monkeys because now they can kill all the monkeys that they want, and they were afraid that my idea was actually to stop the hunting of the monkeys. So we had some problems also with getting samples and getting people to actually talk to us after a while. But I mean, there are huge problems, conservation problems there, and in Príncipe not so much, in São Tomé a lot more, but habitat fragmentation is growing. Population is growing. Rats and cats are everywhere. I mean, especially rats. We had cameras there, and I think 90% of the times we have the endemic squirrels, which are the rats, showing up in these cameras. And climate shifts and small population of now if we talk about these two species that are being that there are conservation programs, I mean their populations are very small, so we should really address that as well. So what seems to be to me an issue here? It's not the study that was done. I wish I had done it. You know, putting the nest, that was a great idea. You know, having the cameras, that is great. It's the power of words actually, and how these messages they sort of evolve, like they work like genetic evolution. So these ideas, they get into the population, and then they get their own. They become part of it. And if they take hold, they can be problematic. So even when eradication isn't explicitly proposed, languages like key threat or priority interventions shapes public and policy perception, and this is actually happening. So there is a general idea that monkeys shouldn't be there now, okay? And not by the local population, because the local population really, I mean, they care about the monkeys because they want to eat them. So they want them to be there, actually. But NGOs, all local NGOs, people who are more involved with this sort of nature management, this idea is there. You know, that the monkeys shouldn't be there. They should be all taken out if possible. And the idea that they will not be is because people might get a bit upset because they want to eat them, or it's too hard, so it will never happen. So this sets the stage for conflictual conservation, because these monkeys are actually important for people. people's livelihoods are threatened in the name of a bird. Most locals may never have seen. So when we ask them about the principal search, most people have never seen it, or they confuse it with any other bird. So we did conduct some interviews in both islands, and we tried to understand from different stakeholders how these monkeys were important, how much were these monkeys important to them, and the main is that Mona monkeys are not just invaders. So they were actually naturalized 300 to 500 years ago. They are co-inhabitants of previous cultural and ecological landscapes. So they've been there almost as long as people have been there. So culturally, this society that evolved together with these monkeys and feeding on these monkeys and depending on the monkeys. And we do see that. If we look at this pyramid of food, monkeys are not the cheapest sort of meat by kilogram, but they are actually preferred to cheapest option. So people will actually pay more money to eat monkey, okay? And so they will definitely be more important than frozen chicken, what they call the plastic chicken, because they are seen as much more nutritious and much better. So monkeys rarely reach the markets. So when they're hunted, they are already distributed. They never reach the market. So they are really important for people. People really want to have them. I've never been there in August. I've been wanting to go there, but there's parties all over the whole month of August. It's a huge party, and monkeys are the main dish when they can get them, when there's fuel to get cartridges to kill them. So, but monkeys are part of the culture. They're even part of the economic culture. So they are in one of the notes, the Dobra's notes. So framing them as purely invasive villains risks reinforcing top-down conservation ideologies that alienate communities and simplify history, which in turn will be bad also for conservation projects involving precipice rush. So if people really feel that their culture, their livelihoods are being threatened by these conservation strategies, I'm sure that they will not care about this rush. So it's sort of, I'm not giving you any data. I'm not telling I'm not here to say how we should do it. It's just like sort of brainstorming all these things that are happening. So how can community-based conservation work for the protection of principal thrush? Maybe we should shift the narrative, try to shift the narrative. I don't think it has been done on purpose, but it really took hold. And the same way we did it to make it like that, we can probably shift it and try to look more into adaptive coexistence. So how can we really maintain monkeys as part of these cultural important traditions, and also work on conservation of the endemic species, which are really threatened, and they will most likely suffer in the coming years. Emphasize that monomonkeys are part of principal human ecology and not an invader to be removed. Position them as one pressure among many, not the primary threat, and frame interventions as adaptive participatory risk reduction, not elimination. Okay, so these are just some ideas that I'm putting out there. And then again, coming also to what Ivo was talking, bridging the gap. So not looking just into the biological data that we want to have, but looking at how people looking into people's needs. So historically, wildlife conservation was dominated by biological, ecological science. There's been a shift as well. Social science was often marginalized, and in my department, I work with psychologists, so there's always also this sort of jokes around. But now I'm working with psychologists on another project, so we are working with cats, and we have the psychologists working with the people that take care of the cats, because without them we cannot do anything. And so this divide limited the ability to address complex human wildlife systems, and this will help shape institutions, norms, histories, and power. So the idea of bridging the gap, of having these interdisciplinary teams instead of just focusing on the data, focusing on what we are going there to do. It's really important. So what is our role as, or our responsibility as researchers? And to me, I think, and to all of us, I think this is the most important question. What can we do? Because as a PhD, I wanted to go there. I had limited amounts of funding, and I wanted to get as much data as I could in the shortest time as I could, because the longer I stay there, the longer I was spending money. When I go there, I'm also spending money. I want to get data, but it's not always possible. So what can we do? I think as researchers, we really have difficulty with this, I guess, because time is precious. We go there with a goal, and everything else sort of gets left behind. But we are not neutral observers. So our presence, funding, institutional backing, cultural assumptions influence how knowledge is produced and received. And we can really feel that. As much as we want to be neutral, we are never neutral. The fact that we are going there, the fact that people assume that we have funding, the fact that people assume that there's money involved, it really shifts all the dynamics when we are in the field. And we have to deal with that. So avoid extractive models it's easier said than done. So when we go there and we want to collect data, we should really think about how we are doing it. How can we involve people? How can we benefit actually people with the data that we are collecting? Prioritize long-term engagement over quick data collection. Also easier said than done. Long-term is what we all want to do, but funding is never long-term, unfortunately, or almost never. So I don't know how to answer that. Invest in local partnerships, not just gatekeepers or intermediaries. Here, of course, this is key to really have local partnerships, have local people, have local institutions working together with us. The problem is that, and I felt it a lot in Nigeria, not in Sudan, not yet, but these institutions are run by people, and people also have problems. So there's always been problems like corruption, money not going to where we want. So there's always these problems that we as researchers, when we are planning a project, we have to keep this in mind. Use community co-design methods, involve locals in defining questions, interpreting the results, and setting goals. I think this is really, really one of the main aspects that I think changed while as I'm doing projects and I'm writing projects. It changed a lot since when I was doing my PhD, which is asking people, what do you think I should do? Local people. I have this idea. What do you think? Do you think it works? How can we do a better job at this? What do you think from your perspective, from your knowledge? What can we do? And usually they are right and we are wrong. That tends to be the most common. And so value local expertise as on par with academic or scientific knowledge, which I did follow some students that came to Nigeria, and they were going there. They were just working on genetics. They would go there, get their samples. I need 300 samples. I get them in 1 month, and I leave. And then when we go and we read their thesis, I mean, the genetics is great, but the understanding of the place is completely zero. So there was no understanding how the animals that they were studying, how were they integrated in the landscape, how people were integrated in the landscape. So it was a complete mess. And so make results accessible and useful to local communities. So really pass on the word. We saw that it works. So the monkeys are villains. So it works. We can pass on the knowledge. We just have to be very careful with the knowledge that we pass and how we pass it as well. And in the end, it's a lot more fun than just collecting data. And I am having fun, and I've been having fun for a while. So thank you for listening.